Welcome back to my intro series to training each individual muscle group. So if you've seen my first video on chest, I hope you enjoyed that. And I'm going to be elaborating and moving on to another muscle group today, and I will be talking about triceps. So initially I wanted to cover the entire arm itself in one video, tricep and bicep, but then I realized that I was going to run out of room. So I will just cover each of them individually. I will do triceps first, and then I will do biceps after that to follow. So the name tricep is exactly what it seems. If you were to look at the prefix tri, it is a three-headed muscle of the upper arm. So the three heads of the tricep are the long head, the lateral head, and the medial head. And each of those will perform the function of the tricep, which is to extend the elbow, with a little bit of a twist coming within the long head that I'll explain in a bit, that can add a little bit of training variability to specifically training the long head of the tricep. So just going over the anatomy first, I drew a very, again, amateur drawing of the tricep here. So as you'll see over here, this is the scapula, and then the three heads of the triceps. So if you notice the long head, we'll start with that one first. So all three heads of the tricep have the same insertion point, which is the movable portion of the joint. So in that case, it's the olecranon process of the ulna, and for our cases considered, just think of the elbow. So that is the insertion point of the tricep. As for the origin, that's where it varies from head to head of the tricep. So if we're talking about long head, you'll see that I've drawn it here. So we'll trace up from the elbow, and then it actually inserts on the infraglenoid tubercle of the scapula, which you see there with the tendon. So the long head will actually have its insertion on the scapula. So what does that mean? Keep that thought in mind, and I will get into that in a little bit. And then if we look at the lateral head, or the outside head of the tricep, and the medial head, or the inner head, they both share the same origin point, and that's the posterior humerus, the upper arm bone. So those will not actually go all the way up into the shoulder girdle. They will simply stay here. And then if I were to make a three-dimensional drawing, you would see on the other side the medial head. So those are the three heads. And now as we move into function, this is where you will see, because of the different origin point, their functions will stay the same, but also with the long head there's going to be a little bit extra. So what we do with the tricep is we concentrically extend the elbow. That holds true for all three heads. And also you could concentrically extend the shoulder with the long head. So with that origin point being on the scapula, once we have a fully extended elbow, the long head will then take over to extend the shoulder joint past full extension at the elbow joint. So that's key to keep in mind when training the triceps. And if you specifically struggle with long head tricep development, look for shoulder extension to come into play to help assist your development there. So that pretty much covers everything in regards to anatomy. Not to get too crazy with the terminology, none of that necessarily matters for the training purposes. So just think of the insertion and origin points, and with everything we want to shorten those points when we train. So as we stretch to fully lengthen the tricep, we flex the elbow, decrease that joint angle, and then extend the elbow to shorten that distance between insertion and origin point. Moving on to exercise execution when it comes to tricep. And again, like I mentioned with chest, it will start at the scapula specifically, and that will be with all upper body movements. And you want to keep the scapula stable in a retracted and depressed position. So pull those shoulder blades back, pull those shoulder blades down, and that will give you a stable position for you to extend the elbow and then to contract the tricep. And then from there, the big thing with triceps, with biceps, you'll see I'll elaborate on this a little bit more. You want to select exercises that really align well with the elbow joint. The elbow is a joint that a lot of people will struggle and have pain with, whether it be tendonitis, golfer's elbow, tennis elbow, anything like that. And to alleviate that and to prevent that from happening in the first place, you want to make sure that you are aligning the elbow joint with the tension directly. You don't want any kind of flaring or anything like that. And I'll give a few specific examples. So if we're thinking tricep, optimally we want to have a 3-point checklist of what we want to actually keep in line. So we want that to be our wrist, our elbow joint, and our shoulder joint. And have the tension coming from whatever means it may be, whether it be a cable in front of us or a dumbbell acting straight up and down. We want those 3 checkpoints, those 3 joints, to be in proper alignment in opposition to the tension. So to give a real world example of that is, if you guys have seen me perform a 2-arm cross cable tricep extension in a free motion cable stack. And the main reason I do that is for proper alignment to direct the tension through the elbow joint. Because with the tension, imagine it being an X. So if I'm aligned here and I have tension coming from the left and from the right from the cables, if I'm able to set up in such a position that I have my shoulder blades locked down and back like this, and I have my elbows locked in here at my natural carrying angle, that's in direct line with the tension. So as I extend this way and extend this way like this, the tension, you can see, will go directly through my elbow joint and not lead to any kind of joint discomfort. As opposed to, if I were to change that, to get into that position, assume you would do a single cable tricep pushdown. So then the tension would be simply acting straight up and down in a line like that. So if I'm here in that same position where I set up with my scapula pulled down and back, and I'm here, so if the tension's coming directly from the center point, and even if my elbows are at the sides in a generally regarded safe position, the tension is still pulling me to the middle, which means I'm more likely to flare my elbows, and with my elbow joint going out like that from my side, and the tension working straight up and down, that's not going to be proper alignment, and that could lead to some elbow problems in the future. So definitely keep that in mind, especially with small joints like the elbow. You will see that I look for many of the same factors when I train my biceps, just in the opposite motion, and I will expand on that a little bit more. Also be mindful of your resistance profiles with everything. So we know that our muscle has a varying ability to produce force throughout the lengthened, mid, and shortened ranges. So same thing is true with the tricep. You will generally be able to produce more force in the lengthened and mid ranges. Up top here, imagine a cable coming from me straight in front, and more force there than you would be able to produce in the shortened range. So within your programming of your workout, you want to take that into account. You want to be able to vary your ranges throughout a workout. You want to select exercises that will overload the shortened range, but you want to spend a lot of your time in those middle and lengthened ranges, because at the end of the day, it will come down to force production. And then if you match the tension from whatever you're using, cable, dumbbell, barbell, etc., if you're able to match what your body's able to produce, it's going to set a more consistent profile and in turn become a more efficient exercise. Lastly, with execution, I want to just talk about volume and frequency a little bit with triceps specifically. So as opposed to chest, I didn't really touch on it as much in the chest video. I wish I did. But with triceps, they are a smaller muscle group. They're an arm muscle. And just thinking about sheer size, if you were to compare the triceps to muscle groups like the quads, the size is much different. So in turn, when you are training your triceps, it's generally not going to be as systemically taxing. You won't be out of breath after a set of tricep extensions, or you won't be able to it's not like you won't be able to get into your set until 5 minutes from your previous set. So with that, a smaller muscle group tends to require a little bit less volume, a little less stimulus per workout, because the recovery efforts will be a little bit more enhanced since it's a smaller muscle group. So keeping that in mind when you are selecting your programming, don't overdo it with the volume with triceps. I keep it with the same principles that I use throughout all my training. Focus on a few hard, heavy sets till failure. And don't misinterpret that point. You want to train the triceps just like you train everything else. A lot of people will also fall into the pits of arm training, looking more for a pump, higher reps, more volume. Keep everything the same. Muscles are muscles. And what I'm just saying is, since it is a smaller muscle, it arguably will not require as many sets. So you might be able, if you train very efficiently with your execution on point and your effort constantly progressing, failure every set, you may be able to get away with maybe 4 or 5 total sets for triceps and move along in your workout. And in turn, with the volume so low, that's where frequency will come in. So that allows you the freedom to plug in other muscle groups into the workout. And also, like I mentioned before, you're able to train the triceps a little bit more frequently, granted your recovery efforts are on point. If your recovery efforts are not, those 4 or 5 sets that you might have done could leave you sore for a few days and may inhibit your next tricep training session. Lastly, I'll speak to cues. So these are the specific body positioning cues that I will use with clients when I train them, and a lot of the stuff that I want to keep locked in stone and allow them to think about before they even worry about the movement itself. So a lot of things in regards to setup to get into an exercise before you even start to create movement, how to initiate the movement, and how to maintain the tension throughout the movement, finish strong, repeat it for a very efficient set. As I mentioned before, you want the scapula retracted and depressed, and this can also tie hand in hand with bracing. So if you really have a trouble retracting and depressing your scapula on a tricep exercise, and in the case of triceps, especially with pushdowns, many of those exercises, granted that you do them with a cable in front of you, are going to tend to pull you forward, and they're going to pull at your shoulder joint and your scapula first. So if I'm doing a pushdown and I really struggle like this at the end of my set and my scapula fails and I become internally rotated, that could be a problem. A way to alleviate that is look for some additional bracing. I always advocate for bracing when training to increase your force output, but also in this case, we want to make sure our triceps are the things or the muscle that are failing first in an exercise. We don't want it to come from our scapula. So if you're able, in that same case, doing a tricep pushdown, if you could get some artificial stability from a bench that you sit on and drive your blades back into, that'll make you be able to remain braced, keep that scapula stable for maybe a few more reps, which in turn could then make the triceps the muscle that actually fails first, which at the end of the day is our job. With setup, again, we want to think our elbows at the sides. Speaking back to the cross pushdown example, that's what makes that such a great exercise, because it matches our body's natural carrying angle. So if I were to stand here in whatever comfy anatomical position that my body will automatically revert to without thinking, my elbows are going to go at an angle, maybe 30 to 45 degrees from my sides. They will not come directly down. This is not basic anatomical position for people. The natural carrying angle will tend to lie out. That's why the cross pushdown is such a better exercise as opposed to any of your other alternatives for pushdowns, because it matches that natural carrying angle. And that's what we want to look for when we set up. So if you don't have a free motion cable stack, another good option to look for is to do a rope tricep pushdown. If you have long ropes, definitely use those. If you have normal size ropes, pull them all the way out. Make sure the ring is at one end, and then attach 2 ropes. That will allow you to match that carrying angle, keep your push down out wide, prevent you from internally rotating, which will also tie back into that first cue. It'll keep that scapula more retracted and depressed. That also ties hand in hand with the shoulder joint. You want to keep the shoulder joint locked. As I mentioned, the cable or whatever you're using will want to pull you forward. you want to resist that. You want to keep it back. You want to keep it locked. And then initiate the movement by consciously contracting your triceps, which will then in turn extend your elbow to full shortening, a fully extended elbow joint. And then from there, just back to my first point with the long head, from this position, then you can choose if you want, if the long head is your goal, look for some elements of shoulder extension to come into play from there. You can manipulate that with your push downs as well, and within any other exercises, especially things that you work a little bit more over the head with. So that will keep your shoulder joints stable. You guys have seen me do overhead extensions where I've actually varied over time and played around with the tension as well, where a lot of people will struggle to get themselves into a position like this with their shoulders packed more toward their torso to try to extend the elbow, and that seems to be an uncomfortable position. So what I have done is, with that same free motion cable stack or long rope setup, whichever is easier for you in the gym to set up, I get up, I keep my shoulders stable, and then I work in more of an X motion. So imagine a cable, same thing, just pretty much the opposite of a cross push down. I'll have the cables down low. Let me grab another. Well, regardless. So cables down low, and then coming up, we would go out and out. So as a cross push down would come down like this, we're just doing that from the overhead position, coming up like that. So definitely look for that to add into your programming. Also, if you have a free motion cable stack, you've seen recently that I've done some variations. It looks like a cable skull crusher, running the rope attachments right behind me like that. So not to get too much off topic and get into specific exercises, definitely check those out. If you guys want a specific exercise execution, definitely message me and I could send you a video, or we could talk through some tricep programming. But as for anatomy and setup, that's pretty much it with triceps, and I will definitely get videos of me executing some of these exercises next to plug into this video, to show you guys actually what it looks like in the gym, because me standing here with a whiteboard, it's all theoretical. So once we actually see the setup in the gym, the execution, and what we're looking for with the machine, the dumbbell, the barbell in terms of tension, it'll become a lot more clear. So I hope you guys enjoyed the intro to tricep training, and join me for the exercise execution portion. Now in the gym application for tricep training, keeping everything in mind about the insertion and origin point of the tricep, and also the function. So what we're doing with tricep training is simply working to extend the elbow joint for the three heads of the tricep. And then from there, if you were looking to bias the long head a little bit additionally, you would then work for shoulder extension once the elbow is fully extended. So I have Albert here to demonstrate a few exercise selection things that we want to look for when actually selecting our tricep exercises for programming. So we'll start, this is a common exercise that you'll see a lot of people perform in the gym, and it's a simple V-bar tricep. So this is an exercise that I would not recommend in my programming whatsoever, and this is why. So if we have Albert set this up and come down and begin this movement, from this position, you'll see his shoulders become internally rotated because his hands are in front of his body and he's not able to fully retract and depress his scapula through here. So with that, you have the elements of internal rotation at the shoulder joint, which in turn will lead his elbows to be more likely to flare out. And with the tension coming from the cable straight up and down, that doesn't align well with the elbow joint. So what we want to do is we want to alleviate that and allow ourselves to place that tension directly through the elbow joint. So what we do with that is, instead of using a V-bar pushdown, we can also, if you're stuck with one cable, you can use two ropes. So take your normal rope at the gym, pull it all the way out, let the hook stay at one end, and use two. And then we could have that same setup that Albert just demonstrated, where you'd be able to keep your scapula retracted and depressed, and you could go wide. But a little better than that, we can actually use a motion cable stack like this, to demonstrate a 2-arm cross push down. So what Albert's going to do here is he's going to grab opposite hand, and then he's going to cross the cables in front of him and create an X. So as you guys can see from this angle, we have his scapula retracted and depressed, so he's stable from the back end. And now from here, what we're seeing is the cable go directly through his elbow. So we want that tension to go through the elbow joint directly to not allow the elbow to flare and have tension move away somewhere else, which could lead to elbow problems. And as you can see, a full contraction through here. If we were looking to bias the long head a little bit more, we can add a little pop to the end of the strap. So Albert needs to have one more and then hold the contraction. And then from there, to bias the long head, all he would do is extend at the shoulder joint. So pull back from the shoulder. Yep, like that. So with the secondary function of the long head of the tricep being shoulder extension, combine elbow extension first, and then shoulder extension on top of that to bias the long head a little bit more. And you can get really customizable with this in where you stand from the cable to bias different portions of the strength curve. Also, one thing I've done in the past is if you have a real hard time keeping your scapula retracted and depressed, what you can do is you can pull a bench over and allow you to sit down and have something to drive your back into for a little bit of additional bracing. So with that, your triceps can actually be the first muscle group to fail. You don't want to fail at your shoulders first, so we can keep the tension on our tricep, and then just from that point we can focus on output. Dive into is a variation of overhead extension with some of the elements of a skull crusher. So what we did with this is we simply pushed the free motion cables all the way in and then put them up toward the top, pretty much in line with the head, definitely over the shoulder joint, because we want to flex shoulder position to start. So what we're going to do with this is Albert's just going to grab each of these cables and take a step out. The big advantage with this is alignment. So as you see, he's able to perfectly align his upper arm with the tension coming straight through, directing that tension through the elbow joint in a perfect angle to keep those elbows safe. Another big benefit with this exercise is the profile. It will match what your body is able to produce. So as Albert goes back, you'll see the cable right here is 90 degrees from his hand. So at that point, the tension is the greatest. And that will match what our muscle is able to produce. We are stronger in the length and in mid-ranges. And as Albert goes out, you see the cable get closer and closer to his hand. So that'll signify that the tension is going to drop off as our muscles become weaker, more toward that shortened range. So this is a real consistent profile of an exercise that matches what your body's able to produce. And knowing that you can program this in your workouts first, when you're fresh, to consistently hit the tricep. And then after that, you may want to plug in something a little bit more biasing the length and range, where you can still produce force after that. One disadvantage of the motion that we just showed you is definitely going to be bracing. So me especially, when I try to experiment with these, my core was going to be the thing that fails first. To alleviate that, what we can do is we can pull a bench. So what we would just have to do is you would just have to lower the cables back down. And again, another big advantage of a free motion cable stack, you can put it to any angle, so depending on the height of the client, you can adjust accordingly. And then it looks like we'll just have to bump out once. And with this, it's going to be the same exact motion. And now with this, we have the advantage of additional bracing. So as Albert's contracting his tricep out, he's also driving his back as hard as he can into the bench to produce those counter forces, which allows for stable opportunity for output. Everything stays the same, tension will align just as well. And then when it comes to profile, Same thing, overloading the length and range here with appropriate tension, and that tension will then drop out as you finish the movement toward the shortened range. The last exercise I want to demonstrate is a free weight skull crusher. Another exercise that gets butchered by most gym goers, and that's because, again, of alignment at the elbow joint. So you'll see a lot of people use either a straight bar or even an easy curl bar on a skull crusher. So we'll have Albert demonstrate this. And if you really take notice, as he sets up and goes down, what happens is he has the tension working straight up and down because dumbbells, barbells only work in terms of gravity, which would be to pull you straight down. So from there, you'll see his elbow joint kick out a little bit to the side, which will inhibit proper alignment at that joint. And that goes back to your natural carrying angle. So as I mentioned in the anatomy and function video, if you were to just stand in a position that was comfortable, your elbows would not come directly to your sides. They would come out at maybe a 30-degree angle. So we have to take that into account with selecting our exercises, especially with skull crushers. So if you're setting up with an easy bar or a straight bar, and you have the tension working straight down, while your elbows come out like this, that's improper alignment. So how could we alter a skull crusher variation to fit that? You're going to have more success with dumbbells, and there's a few variations within using a dumbbell that can really accommodate whatever level of internal rotation your shoulder is at, put your elbow in a better position. So if we have Albert grab the dumbbells, we'll just first demonstrate a traditional dumbbell skull crusher. So as he comes up, you notice he's able to keep his elbows properly aligned and pin at his sides. So again, dumbbell working straight up and down, and he'll come up, he'll extend, and the dumbbell will finish at the top with his elbow joint fully extended. And with that, if you even struggle to get into that position, we could also make an alteration on that. So what we could do is I'll take the one dumbbell, and a lot of people who have a really tough time with internal rotation at the shoulder, cross-body dumbbell skull crushers will work even better. So Albert, you can pick up that one. And what we're going to do with this one is you're going to turn in, and then you're going to aim for your opposite ear. So if the shoulder joint's a problem for you, this will also align well. You have the tension pulling straight down, and then Albert will extend against that tension and then have everything lined up very well there. So either of those can be used in your programming. One thing I specifically like to do is I like to start with a cross-body variation, and then I could even extend my set with some negative reps to the traditional form of a dumbbell skull crusher position. Also, if your elbows tend to give you a little bit of fuss on these, what you can do is you can use a slight decline. So what we'll do with this is we'll just get a little platform under the bench. And with this, we'll set up the dumbbells again. And all we're going to do with this, and if you notice Albert's starting position, from this point, his joints are not stacked. So his elbow isn't fully flexed here and in a straight line. So as he comes up, these dumbbells are essentially pulling him back, which will allow you to keep more tension on the tricep throughout the entirety of the range of motion, rather than overloading the joint at the top of the motion. So again, if elbows tend to be a nagging issue for you, definitely look at your alignment with what tool you're using, barbell, dumbbell, and then also look at your bench angle. And I have noticed working with people that a slight decline will work a little bit better, but just be mindful of what the tension is actually doing to you, what your muscle is able to produce, and how it aligns with that elbow joint.